As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So the Senate on Tuesday night voted down a resolution introduced by Senator Bernie Sanders that would have frozen U.S. military aid to Israel if the State Department failed to produce a report on whether Israel was committing human rights violations in Gaza. So this resolution invoked the 1961 Foreign Assistance Act, and aid would have also been frozen if human rights violations were found, and I think it's very clear that there would be many to find if there was a real investigation that happened. So the legislation failed pretty badly. It was voted down in a vote of 72 to 11, with only one Republican, which was Senator Rand Paul, voting in favor of it. So it received support from one Republican, 9 Democrats, and then Bernie Sanders, he votes with Democrats mainly, but he is an independent. So Sanders wrote on X before the vote, quote, "It should not be controversial to ask how U.S. weapons are used. We should all want this information. If you believe the war has been indiscriminate, as I do, then we must ask this question. If you believe Israel has done nothing wrong, then this information should support that belief," end quote. During a speech on the Senate floor last week, Sanders said that due to the, quote, "scale of the destruction and the extensive use of U.S. arms in this campaign, including thousands of massive 2,000-pound bombs, Congress must act to conduct real oversight," end quote. And many of the Republicans who are all about oversight for the aid to Ukraine, for the money going to Ukraine, for all the weapons being poured into that war, none of them except for Rand Paul came out in support of this. And what the U.S. is doing, how the U.S. is supporting Israel, it's much less transparent than what's going on in Ukraine. Now, there's no oversight once the weapons get to Ukraine, but the Pentagon releases these detailed lists of all the weapons that they're sending. They're not doing that for Israel. We don't really know the extent of this, don't know how they're paying for all this. The U.S. gives Israel $3.8 billion each year in military aid, but they seem to be dipping into lots of other funds for this. That's not clear, but nobody seems to care. So this is really the first bill that was voted on that sought to kind of rein in what's happening here, that sought to kind of, conduct some oversight of the U.S. support for this mass slaughter of Palestinians. So the White House, of course, came out against the resolution ahead of the vote as it supports unconditional aid to Israel despite the massive civilian death toll. John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman, he said, quote, "We do not believe that this resolution is the right vehicle to address these issues," end quote. And he doesn't think anything is the right vehicle. He does not want to address these issues. Kirby has shrugged off, the massive civilian death toll throughout the war. He's been kind of the main White House propagandist on this war, kind of the face of it when they have the White House press conferences. The U.S. military said on Tuesday that it launched more strikes against the Houthis in Yemen as tensions in the region continue to escalate. U.S. Central Command claimed that it hit Houthi anti-ship missiles. CENTCOM said, quote, "At approximately 4:15 a.m. Sanaa time, U.S. forces struck and destroyed 4 Houthi anti-ship ballistic missiles prepared to launch from Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen," end quote. But later in the day, the Houthis were able to target a Greek-owned ship in the Red Sea, despite the U.S. strikes. So it just goes to show how, the U.S. is not going to be able to prevent the Houthis from hitting ships in the Red Sea and in the Gulf of Aden. CENTCOM said that this vessel, the Zographia, reported that they were struck, but they continued their transit and no injuries were reported, so they were able to move on. So the Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, took credit for the attack and said that the Zographia was bound for Israel. Houthi military spokesman Yahya Sarriya said Yemeni forces, quote, "targeted the ship Zographia, which was headed to the ports of occupied Palestine with several adequate missiles, leaving direct hits," end quote. So the Houthis have made clear they will not stop attacks on Israeli-linked commercial shipping until the U.S.-backed slaughter in Gaza ends. But the U.S. is not pressuring Israel to end it. Instead, they're escalating, and this is the third round of U.S. airstrikes, or whether they launch them from warships or fighter jets isn't clear. But this is the third time the U.S. bombed Yemen since Friday, when the U.S. and the U.K. hit a bunch of targets across Yemen. So things just keep spiraling, and it's just really unbelievable because, they're not going to stop the Houthis. I mean, even if they launch a full war again against them, they're not going to be able to stop them. And now, because the U.S. bombed the Houthis, they're starting to target American shipping. They hit an American commercial vessel the other day, and more shipping companies are suspending transits through the Red Sea. So the whole purpose of this was to protect shipping, and now shipping's disrupted even more. Shell, the British oil company, announced that it is suspending its transits through the Red Sea, and they're a huge oil company. So, and things could really break out at any time. All right, so the next one here, Ukrainian troops are on active defense. So the commander of Ukraine's ground forces has said that his troops are on active defense as Ukrainian forces are no longer attempting to gain territory after the failed counteroffensive. So this is General Alexander Surtsky. He said, quote, "Our goals remain unchanged, holding our positions, exhausting the enemy by inflicting maximum losses," end quote. So that's what their goal is. They're not even saying that they're trying to take any territory now. It's just about defense, and there's still fighting going on along the front, and it is, just a, kind of a stalemate at this point. And time is on Russia's side as we see the Western aid drying up and Ukraine suffering these manpower issues, and they're not able to replenish their forces, and they're struggling to pass this new mobilization bill. So it's just not a good situation for the Ukrainians when it comes to this war. But despite that, Ukrainian political leadership, they're still saying they're going to win. They're still saying they're going to kick the Russians out. The defense minister, Rustem Umerov, said on Sunday that Kiev has not given up on its goal to restore the 1991 borders. And that means kicking Russia out of all of the territory that it captured since February 2022, and also kicking them out of Crimea, which Russia has controlled and governed since 2014, which is just completely unrealistic. But that's still what the political leadership is saying. They seem determined to keep this war going. And when you talk about Zelensky's political survival, if he has to negotiate a deal where he hands over all this territory to Russia, his political career is going to be over after that.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Here's your cover. U.S. drowning in debt. The nation is sinking. That's right. All the facts are there. It's only $34 trillion of debt. Credit card debt, it's only $1.1 trillion. People are going broke. Don't worry about it. Think about it. $34 trillion in debt. You got to be a stupid piece of shit to believe that they're ever going to fucking pay off this debt. We are on the verge of an economic crisis, the likes of which have never been seen in the history of the world, part one or part two. Again, the death of the dollar is coming. They're going to be lowering interest rates. That's the big bet. The markets today took a hit. Gold prices went down a bit. Oil's still a little soft. This is only temporary. You can't forecast where things are going to go because everything is so fucking rigged. This is from your economic update in this week's Trends Journal. This is just part of it. Pick a country, take a trip around the world. By the hard facts and indisputable data across the socioeconomic and geopolitical spectrum, it's a freak show run by political freaks. Who's your favorite little fucking freak? Who do you bow down and suck up to? Oh, I like Biden. I like Trump. I like Sundak over there in England. Worthless piece of shit, Olaf Scholz over there in Germany. A little Gatson Macron. A little fucking dick with a fake fucking hair and a bad fucking attitude. It's a freak show. On the geopolitical side of destruction, for decades we have been detailing the ongoing wars and social unrest sweeping the planet. On the economic front, it's one big scam with the bigs in full control of national economies. Just look at CNBC headline news of the day. Quote, Davos live updates. Ukraine's Zelensky meets with Jamie Dimon and other major investors. Investors. How about a fucking crime syndicate? Why? Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan Chase, whose bank admitted to 5 separate felony counts brought by the U.S. Department of Justice, and being a top member of the bankster crime syndicate, as Wall Street on Parade noted, regulators took no action to remove the board of directors or Jamie Dimon after being convicted of 5 felonies. It's a crime syndicate and they're in charge. Grow the fuck up. It's prosecution for the fullest of we the little people of Slavelandia, but the murderers, they're right out in front of your eyes. The little Georgie Bush with a fucking dick smaller than that. Fake war with penis Cheney. I got to be proper. I can't call him Dick. Oh, this moronic little girl that everybody talks about. Liz Cheney, loser Cheney, nothing Cheney. lying us into the fucking Iraq war where we spend trillions of dollars of our tax money. Keep working, you plantation workers. So we get Saddam Hussein because he's making them weapons of mass destruction. All right? That's what's running the earth. Clowns. Arrogant, murderous fucking clowns. We even have the link of it, where he's playing the piano. So, what is the number one priority of Davos elites? Quote, this is our quote, i.e. the richest, most authoritarian, most arrogant people that control the planet Earth. This is from Davos. Mind control. That's our line. This is from Davos. Severity score. Misinformation and disinformation ranks first. 1% persistent false information, deliberate or otherwise, widely spreads toward media networks, shifting public opinion. You ready? In a significant way towards distrust in facts and authority. Authority? What, some fucking bastard or bitch that tells me what to do? Authority? Like the little cocksucker, motherfucking Fauci, who made up the shit to wear masks, sales 6 feet apart? All that fucking authority? That's Davos. That's in charge. The bigs control everything. And we go on about it. So get ready for Off With Their Heads 2.0. That's just part of your Trends Journal. I'm not going to go into more of the economic update. But this is serious. Because none of this fucking shit's going to make any difference, because World War III, one of our top trends for 2024, is World War III. But again, it's far too early to predict what's going to happen 10 months from now, because we may be annihilated in World War III, or it may be ramping up to that. So there's a lot of wild cards. Nobody could call this game. Nobody could call the economic game. Nobody could call any of the game because of what's going on. So CNN, the Biden administration, is expected to designate the Houthis as an especially designated global terrorist entity amid continued attacks by the Yemen-based militia. This is the Houthis that the United States tried to overthrow with that little scumbag, that arrogant little fuck who's our Secretary of State. I think he was under the desk Secretary of State under Obama, the Nobel Peace Prize, piece of crap prize winner, who supported the Ukraine war, the Houthi war, the Yemen war with Saudi Arabia. And Blinken went over there to help give, quote, intelligence. And the United States is refueling the jets from Saudi Arabia so they could bomb the fucking shit out of and kill some 400,000 Yemenis. Yeah. So now they're a terrorist group, not the United States, who slaughters people all over the world. Oh, and I love the line, the Iran-backed Houthis. Huh. How about the American-backed IDF? No, you can't say that.
And today in history, January 17th, 1706, I believe it was, Benjamin Franklin was born. He was so famous in so many fields around the world that they actually called him the first American. We've probably all heard plenty of witty or pithy quotes and phrases that are attributed to him or that he made famous, like no pain, no gain, time is money, haste makes way. So many of them that are still with us today. But he was much more than just a creative and witty writer. So on this episode, I'm going to share with you what I see as my top, I don't even know what the number is, maybe 10 or so, my top favorite quotes from him on power, government, liberty, and more. He did not like a single person having so much power. And of course, they fought a long bloody war against a hereditary monarch, the king and parliament, basically unlimited power. It was the Declaratory Act where they would claim the power over the colonies in all cases whatsoever. And so he was concerned about the executive branch being proposed at the Philadelphia Convention. I don't think he was ever convinced to like the form that it took. And here's how he put it on June 4th, 1787. He said, "The executive will be always increasing here, as elsewhere, till it ends in a monarchy." So Benjamin Franklin warned us that we would have a relentlessly increasing set of powers in the hands of a single person until it ended in a monarchy. And now we don't have a hereditary monarch here today, but in many ways, executives, presidents of today wield far more power than monarchs of Benjamin Franklin's time. So I would say in many ways, he certainly called it with that prediction. And of course, to me, my favorite prediction from the Philadelphia Convention. This is the day that we call Constitution Day. I've cited this many times, September 17, 1787. This is the closing of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. He rises to make a speech. Well, he wrote it out, and I believe James Wilson read it for him. He was pretty old at this point, but he said, hey, let's ratify this. I agree to it. You guys all know I have problems with it. He says, but this is as good as we're going to get with all these different viewpoints. He said, there is no form of government but what may be a blessing to the people if well administered. So if you have good people in office doing the right thing, you're going to get good results. But he didn't expect that to last for long. Of course, everyone knew who the first president was going to be, George Washington, and whether you love him or hate him, everyone was pretty much on board with this has got to be the guy. He said, and I believe farther that this is likely to be well administered for a course of years and can only end in despotism, as other forms have done before it, when the people shall become so corrupted as to need despotic government, being incapable of any other. So Benjamin Franklin certainly recognized that no matter how good you could get the words on paper to read, that as long as the people were corrupt and the people wanted despotism, that's what you'd end up with. You can't rely on words on paper to limit the power of tyrants. You can put some rules down, and if good people are there, they're going to follow them. And if the people themselves are good, they're not going to tolerate anything that goes beyond that. And that's probably where the notion of a republic, madam, if you can keep it, comes from. Because ultimately, they created a republic. And it's not a republic if the people in power can keep it a republic, but if the people of the several states themselves can do that. And the warning that it is up to the people themselves to protect and preserve their own constitution and their own liberty, whether the government happens to like it or not. And certainly they do not. And here he is a couple of years later in 1789. And this is, of course, now things are in effect. The Constitution is in effect. He's writing a letter to his old friend, Jean-Baptiste Leroy. He hadn't heard from a while. I think he was a little concerned about what was going on in France and if he was okay. But he pointed out, and this is, of course, a very timeless quote from Benjamin Franklin, our new Constitution is now established and has an appearance that promises permanency. But in this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes. We've all heard that phrase. Unfortunately, Benjamin Franklin passed away just months later, so that was a pretty timely one as well. So nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes. He says, as all history informs us, this is again at the Philadelphia Convention, June 2nd, 1787, as all history informs us, there has been in every state and kingdom a constant kind of warfare between the governing and the governed. Again, a student of history, he recognized, of course, Benjamin Franklin, despite all of his success, he was a self-made man. And I think he was kind of a champion, especially amongst a lot of the more aristocratic type Federalists. He was certainly a Federalist, but he was more of a champion of the average person in many ways. And this is, I think, a recognition that people with power were always basically, this is just something we've seen all through history. The existence of government has proven this, if you're being honest. But he recognized that in all history, every country, all the time, everywhere, there was always some kind of a warfare, even if it wasn't outright, between the people, the rulers, and the governed themselves. And he noted this in 1779. This was a big issue here. And at one point, the British actually even counterfeited notes to actually cause economic strife in the colonies during the conflict as well. But he said the depreciation of the American paper is solely owing to the excessive quantities. The only reason that people were losing purchasing power was because there was an excessive amount of printing of money. That's Benjamin Franklin to Dumas in 1779. And here's a letter to Jane Mecom in November of 1773. He said, in my own private concerns with mankind, I have observed that to kick a little when under imposition has a good effect. A little sturdiness when superiors are much in the wrong sometimes occasions consideration. And there is truth in the old Italian saying, it's an old Italian proverb from the late 16th century. He said that if you make yourself a sheep, the wolves will eat you. There's a lot of sheep. We are literally surrounded by sheep, and the wolves have been feasting for generations, especially when it comes to usurpations of power and violations of the Constitution, violations or attacks on your liberty. Make yourselves a sheep, and the wolves will eat you. Here he is with another one. Of course, what do you do to deal with people in power? He proposed this I think it was just hours after the Second Continental Congress approved the Declaration of Independence. Of course, he was on the Committee of Five. He primarily played the role of editor to Thomas Jefferson. Some small changes were made based on his recommendation for the Declaration of Independence. But of course, his name lent significant amount of weight to that as well. But shortly after they approved it, the same day, a committee was also appointed to come up with a Great Seal for the United States. And Benjamin Franklin was on that as well, and he recommended this one. He did not originate the phrase. I'll have a link in the show notes from the great historian J.L. Bell that tells this full history of this phrase, but this was what he recommended as the Great Seal of the United States. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. And here he is again in a letter to James Bowdoin in 1775. If we tamely give up our rights in this contest, a century to come will not restore us in the opinion of the world. If you take a stand for your liberty and you just blow it, or if you talk about it and you don't do anything, if you tamely give up your rights, you just let it roll, you are kind of a disgrace to humanity, is what he's saying. If we tamely give up our rights in this contest, a century to come will not restore us in the opinion of the world, said Benjamin Franklin. We shall be stamped with the character of dastards and poltroons and fools, and be despised and trampled upon, not by this haughty, insolent nation only, but by all mankind. Present inconveniences are therefore to be borne with fortitude, and better times expected.
We watch the elections because we have to keep up, and then we make our comments, and we're free to do that. But you can't avoid it. You must have heard there was an election that went on. Did that get you excited, or do you say, why are we paying so much attention? How do you feel about all that?
I was watching it far more closely back when you were running for office. These days, less so. My challenge, I think, with elections is that they can be very distracting. A lot of people focus on them, they get excited by them, and rightly so. I mean, they're important. But at the end of the day, I think people can make more impact in their community and in their family. And so that's what we're about, is trying to empower people to say, like, yes, pay attention to the election, sure, vote. But don't let that consume all of your political energy. There's so much that you should be focused on in your own home and your community.
Yeah, and voting is a consequence of that other activity and education.
Right.
And that's one of the things that has attracted me to and got attention on what you're doing, because to me you're dealing with education, and you're starting at an early age.
Yeah.
And more so than a lot of others have. We know it's important, and the enemy knows it's important to deal with the very young, to indoctrinate. And unfortunately, I would say that we've been losing the battle to the indoctrinators in the government schools. So that's why I was delighted to see what's happening here. So tell us a little bit about how you got started. Was there a motivating factor? Had you thought about this for 5 years and then decided to do it?
Yeah.
Did somebody else prod you into it and make a suggestion? What happened?
So I started my organization, Libertas Institute, in 2011. And my children were very young at the time. A few years into doing this work, my kids were 5 and 3. And I found that when I would come home at the end of the day, I would ask my kids, what did you do today? How was your day? And they would tell me in very simple terms, I watched this cartoon or I played with this toy. But my 5-year-old, when he was almost 6, he started to turn the question to me. Dad, what did you do today? Where were you? And I found myself wanting to share with him what Dad did. Hey, I was fighting eminent domain at City Hall, or I was combating this socialist legislation. So around this time, Elijah and I were talking about what would it look like to do a kid's book. I had gone to Amazon. I was trying to find books that teach liberty to kids. There was nothing. And so Elijah and I said, let's do a book. Let's just see what happens. There was no vision for this, for what it's become. There was no idea of how big it would be. But we decided to do our first book. We launched it in 2014. The reception was amazing. And to us, that was the vote of confidence that we should do another one and then another one. And so it slowly evolved over time until 2020 when the world fell apart. Now, so many families came to us for books and curriculum. And so we've really exploded since then, and it's been going great.
I mean, as a practitioner of parenthood, as you were, it obviously what you've done really strikes a chord. And I remember very early on when the law came out, the Tuttle Twins, the law, I think you passed out copies to basically everyone who came through in any office and passed it around. And I realized about 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago maybe, we were in Houston at a homeschool store. And where we go, for our homeschooling supplies, and there's a huge display of all the Tuttle Twins books, and I thought, okay, this is great. This is teaching young kids liberty, and Mayberry's books were there as well. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I guess my question is an obvious one, but you started Libertas Institute, but at some point you started focusing on the youth and on teaching young people about liberty, about economics. What was your thought process? At what point did you say, we hit it, this is it, this is what we want to do?
Well, in the early days, it was all experimental. It was just, for Elijah and I, it was a labor of love. It was a side project for both of us. And it was slow going in the early years.
Yeah.
So, people would spread it through word of mouth. They would pop up in stores like Daniel just mentioned. And but again, I think for both of us, Elijah and I, 2020 was the turning point. There were so many families that were saying, what do I do? Now I'm homeschooling my kids. Where do I go? What curriculum can I use? And that's when the word of mouth exploded, because we had enough of a base of support that they could refer all their friends and tell them, oh, go get the Tuttle Twins curriculum, go get the Tuttle Twins books. So hopefully we don't have another pandemic anytime soon to spread the word even more, but that was a huge silver lining for us. Let me give you a little snapshot. This will help illustrate it. When we started in 2014, all the way through 2019, we sold a total of about 750,000 books. And it was a tiny little self-published thing. We were very happy by that number. In 2020 alone, we sold 1.3 million books, which was nearly double of the entire past history. So the toothpaste is out of the tube. A lot of people are now learning about these ideas. And I get excited thinking about who are the future Ron Pauls out there, that we're planting all these seeds at a young age, helping these kids learn these ideas when they're young.
Well, so do you have a single book that you're working on right now, similar to either the booklets? Let's go out like the Tuttle Twins book.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, we have books for toddlers. We have our main books, which are for elementary and middle school age, and then we have books for teenagers as well. Right now, what Elijah and I have been working on over the past few weeks is our next children's book. This one is going to teach about Marxism, and we're going to use material from Thomas Sowell, who's written a lot about this, and we're going to teach kids about what Marxism looks like, even with things today like ESG and DEI and all this unfairness that we see. We want to help kids understand kind of the Marxist roots, the class warfare, the oppressor versus the oppressed. And so hopefully that book will be out in a few months, but that's what we're actively working on right now.
Very good. And Daniel, do you have a question for follow-up?
Well, I think it's maybe your most recent title, but it certainly caught my attention, which is the Tuttle Twins' Guide to True Conspiracies. That's taken on a big deal, and just having that title is very attractive. Tell us how that came to be, and tell us some of our true conspiracies.
Wow, okay, so this was a very fun book for Elijah and I to do. There's a lot of conspiracy theories out there. For this particular book, we wanted to focus on 20 actual provable conspiracies, something for which there's documentation. And so we compiled a list, and for us the goal here is to help, this is a book for teenagers, by the way, this is in our teen series. Our goal is to help teenagers develop critical thinking, because if we can show them, look at all these shenanigans from the past when all this corruption has happened, then I think we can prime them to more easily understand that that type of corruption is happening today, and let's be on guard against it. I'll give you a little snapshot. Both of you are well aware of this story, but this is one of the ones that I like to share. The way I tell the story is that during the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK is in office, there was this fringe group of radical activists who wanted to go to war in Cuba. They wanted to invade. At the time, American polling showed that they didn't want to go to war. No one wanted to trigger World War III. And so, but this group did, these radical activists. They somehow got an audience with JFK himself to pitch their plan. Their plan was, let's bomb American cities, let's shoot down planes, let's shoot rafts full of people fleeing Cuba in search of freedom. Let's do all of this, but make it look like the Cubans themselves are the ones doing the shooting and the killing, so that we can blame it on Cuba, we can enrage the American people, and then they will demand that we go to war. JFK shot down the proposal from this group of radical activists, and so when I tell this story, I then give the reveal at the end. Who was this group of radical activists? You guys probably already know. It was the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States military. This is called Operation Northwoods. You can find the declassified memo online. And so we've got 20 stories like this in the book that are just so eye-opening for people who never learned in their own history books in school that anything like this happened.